I never imagined that underlining a few words on a restaurant receipt would change my life forever. My name is Emma Parker, and I'm 22 years old. I'm a law student at Columbia University, working the night shift at Bellanova, an upscale Italian restaurant in Manhattan, to pay my tuition. The job is demanding, but it helps me understand people, their quirks, their tells, the subtle ways they communicate without saying a word. That skill, honed over countless shifts observing customers, saved a man's life one cold November evening. It also painted a target on my back that I'm still trying to outrun. The night started like any other Thursday. The restaurant hummed with the usual energy, clinking glasses, murmured conversations, the soft jazz playing overhead. I moved between tables with practiced efficiency, balancing plates and remembering orders without writing them down. Table 12 had just been seated. A man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, mid-30s, with dark hair touched with silver at the temples. He had the kind of presence that made other diners glance his way. Not aggressive, but commanding. His eyes, a piercing gray, scanned the room with the awareness of someone who always knew where the exits were. "Good evening," I said, approaching with my usual smile. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" "Macallan." "Neat," he replied, his voice smooth and controlled. "And I'll have the osso buco when you're ready." I nodded and headed to the bar, where I noticed something odd. A man I'd never seen before was working behind the counter, filling in for Tony, our regular bartender. He was younger, maybe late 20s, with a nervous energy that didn't match the relaxed atmosphere Tony usually maintained. When I placed the order for the Macallan, his hand trembled slightly as he poured. "You knew?" I asked casually. "Covering for Tony tonight," he said without meeting my eyes. "He called in sick." Something about his tone felt wrong. Tony never called in sick. He'd worked through a flu last month without missing a shift. I filed the observation away and returned to table 12 with the whiskey. As I set the glass down, I noticed the man studying the restaurant's layout. His gaze lingered on the bar, then the kitchen entrance, then the front door. It was the kind of assessment someone makes when they're expecting trouble. When his eyes met mine, I saw something unexpected. Not threat, but calculation mixed with a hint of wariness. "Your ossobuco will be out shortly," I said. "Thank you," he replied, and something in his voice made me pause. I returned to my other tables, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The man at the bar kept glancing toward table 12, his hand repeatedly dipping into his jacket pocket. The nervous bartender served other customers mechanically, but his attention kept drifting to the dining room. Then I saw it, a brief exchange of glances between the bartender and the man at the bar. It lasted less than a second, but it was enough. My heart started pounding. I'd studied criminal law long enough to recognize the signs of a planned operation. The fake bartender, the positioned gunman, the target at table 12. It was all clicking into place with terrifying clarity. I had maybe minutes, possibly seconds, to act. Going to the manager would take too long and might trigger the hit prematurely. Calling the police was out. The gunmen would act before they arrived. I needed to warn the man at table 12 without alerting the conspirators. I grabbed the check presenter and a pen, my mind racing through options. Writing a direct note was too obvious. If the bartender or gunman saw me passing it, they'd act immediately. Then it hit me. I quickly printed a receipt for table 12's order, though he hadn't asked for it yet. With a steady hand that belied my racing pulse, I wrote the bill. 1 Macallan 18. 1 ossobuco gunman at bar. Setup failed. Exit now. I carefully underlined those specific words. Gunman, bar, setup, failed, exit, now, making them stand out just enough that someone looking closely would notice, but not so obviously that a casual glance would reveal the message. My hand shook as I completed the last word. If I was wrong, I'd look paranoid and probably lose my job. If I was right and he didn't understand, he'd die. If the conspirators noticed what I was doing, I might die with him. I approached table 12 with the check presenter, my professional smile firmly in place, despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. The man at the bar had his hand inside his jacket now, fingers clearly wrapped around something concealed. I had seconds. "Sir, I'm so sorry, but there's been an issue with our kitchen," I said smoothly, placing the receipt in front of him. "I need to verify your order before it's prepared. Could you please review this?" His gray eyes flicked to me, slightly annoyed at the interruption, then down to the paper. I saw the exact moment he noticed the underlined words. His expression didn't change, a testament to impressive self-control, but his posture shifted almost imperceptibly. He read the message once, then again, his finger subtly tracing the underlined words. "I see," he said calmly, his voice betraying nothing. He reached into his jacket. For one terrifying second, I thought I'd made a horrible mistake, and pulled out his wallet. He laid down several $100 bills, far more than the cost of his drink. "Actually, I just remembered an urgent appointment. Please accept this for your trouble, and keep the change." He stood smoothly, buttoning his jacket with practiced ease. The man at the bar tensed, his hand fully inside his jacket now. The fake bartender's eyes widened in panic as his target began moving toward the exit. I had to buy a few more seconds. "Oh, let me get your change, sir," I said loudly, deliberately stepping between the gunman's line of sight and table 12. "No need," the man said, already walking. "You've been extraordinarily perceptive tonight. That's worth far more than the meal I didn't eat." The man at the bar stood abruptly, but table 12's guest was already at the door, moving with purpose but not quite running, fast enough to escape, but not so fast as to cause obvious alarm. I heard the fake bartender swear under his breath. The gunman started to follow, but a large party chose that exact moment to enter, blocking his path. By the time he pushed through them, his target had disappeared into the Manhattan night. For a moment, everything seemed frozen. Then the fake bartender caught my eye, and I saw pure rage there. He knew. He knew I'd warned his target. My blood ran cold as he pulled out his phone and made a quick call, his eyes never leaving my face. The gunman returned, shaking his head, and the two of them had a brief, intense conversation. They both looked at me, and I knew with absolute certainty that I'd just made enemies of very dangerous people. My manager, oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded, approached with concern. "Emma, what happened? Did that customer leave without eating?" "He had an emergency," I managed to say, my voice steadier than I felt. "He left a generous tip, though." I finished my shift in a daze, hyper-aware of every customer, every sound, every shadow. The fake bartender had disappeared during the confusion, and the man at the bar had left shortly after. I kept expecting them to return, to confront me, to finish what they'd started with a different target. When my shift finally ended at 11 p.m., I practically ran to the subway, looking over my shoulder every few steps. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my cramped studio apartment in Brooklyn, staring at the ceiling, replaying the evening's events over and over. Who was the man I'd saved? Why did someone want him dead? And most importantly, what would happen to me now that I'd interfered? I'd studied criminal law long enough to know that organized crime didn't forgive witnesses, especially not ones who actively disrupted their operations. I'd saved one man's life, but possibly forfeited my own in the process. The next morning, exhausted and jumpy from lack of sleep, I attended my criminal procedure class. Professor Hendricks was discussing witness protection programs, and the irony wasn't lost on me. I barely absorbed the lecture, my mind still circling around the previous night's events. When class ended, I headed to the library to study for my upcoming contracts exam, desperate for any distraction from my spiraling thoughts. That's when I noticed him. A man in a dark jacket, positioned near the library entrance watching me. When our eyes met, he didn't look away or pretend to be doing something else. He just stared, his message clear. We know where you are. My hands trembled as I gathered my books, and I left through a different exit, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Over the next 3 days, I spotted different men following me. They never approached, never threatened, just watched. It was psychological warfare, and it was working. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on my studies. I stopped going to Bellanova, calling in sick, though I knew I couldn't avoid work forever. I needed that job, needed the money for tuition and rent. But every time I thought about returning, I remembered the hatred in the fake bartender's eyes, and my courage evaporated. On the 4th day, something changed. I was walking to campus, trying to pretend I didn't notice the man tailing me 2 blocks back, when a black Mercedes pulled up beside me. The rear window rolled down, and I found myself looking at the man from table 12, Marcus Sterling, as I would soon learn. "Get in," he said simply. "I don't." Emma Parker, 22, law student at Columbia, works at Bellanova to pay tuition, lives alone in Brooklyn. His gray eyes locked onto mine. "They know everything about you. They're planning to move on you within 48 hours. If you want to live, get in the car. Now." I looked back at the man following me. He'd stopped, phone to his ear, watching the Mercedes with obvious alarm. Whatever decision I made in the next few seconds would determine whether I survived the week. I thought about my law professor's warnings about getting involved with criminals, about maintaining ethical boundaries, about the slippery slope of compromise. Then I thought about dying on a Brooklyn street, another unsolved murder in a city full of them. I got in the car. The Mercedes pulled away from the curb smoothly, and I found myself in the back seat with Marcus Sterling, separated from the driver by a privacy partition. The interior smelled of leather and expensive cologne. My heart hammered against my ribs as I tried to process what I'd just done. I'd voluntarily entered a vehicle with a man who was clearly involved in organized crime, a man whose life I'd saved, but who remained a complete stranger. Every instinct screamed that I'd made a terrible mistake, yet sitting on that sidewalk waiting to be killed seemed like a worse option. "You're scared," Marcus observed, his tone matter-of-fact rather than mocking. "That's smart. Fear keeps you alive in this world." "Who are you?" I asked, proud that my voice didn't shake. "And what do you want with me?" "My name is Marcus Sterling. I run several businesses in the city, some legitimate, some less so. That man at the bar was named Victor Romero, a contract killer employed by the Delgado family. They're my primary competitors in certain ventures." He spoke as casually as if discussing the weather. The bartender was Miguel Santos, Victor's spotter. "You correctly identified and disrupted a professional assassination attempt. That makes you either incredibly perceptive or incredibly lucky." "Both, maybe," I said, trying to keep my breathing steady. "What happens now?" "That depends on what you want." He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo. It was me, leaving my apartment building that morning. "The Delgados have already identified you as my associate. In their minds, you're either someone I planted at Bellanova to watch for exactly this kind of operation, or you're someone I'm involved with personally. Either way, they've marked you as a valid target for retaliation." Cold dread washed over me. "But I'm not your associate. I'm just a waitress who happened to notice something wrong." "The truth doesn't matter to people like the Delgados. Perception does. They believe you work for me, so you might as well actually work for me. At least then you'll have protection." He pocketed his phone. "I'm offering you a choice, Emma. Option 1. You continue your life as normal, unprotected, and within a week you'll be dead. They won't make it quick either. They'll want to send me a message through you. Option 2. You accept my protection, which comes with certain conditions and expectations. What kind of conditions? I asked, though I already knew I didn't really have a choice. Dead was dead, regardless of how I got there. You continue your studies at Columbia. You live your life as normally as possible, but you accept a security detail, discreet professionals who will ensure you're never alone and vulnerable. You also accept a full scholarship to Columbia that I'll arrange through one of my legitimate businesses. Consider it payment for saving my life. He paused, gauging my reaction. Additionally, you'll meet with me periodically to discuss what you observed that night. Your instincts are remarkable, and I want to understand how you knew. Is that all? I tried to keep the skepticism from my voice. For now, I don't ask for loyalty that hasn't been earned, and I don't expect you to become part of my organization. You saved my life. This is me returning the favor by saving yours. What you do with that opportunity is your business. The car had been driving in circles around Manhattan while we talked. Now it pulled over on a quiet street near Columbia's campus. Marcus handed me a business card with only a phone number printed on it. Call this number if you're in immediate danger. Someone will always answer, any time of day or night. Within a few hours, you'll notice your shadows have changed. My people instead of theirs. They won't interact with you unless necessary, but they'll keep you alive. His gray eyes held mine. I pay my debts, Emma. You gave me a chance to live. I'm giving you the same. And if I refuse, then I wish you the best of luck surviving the next week without help. But I don't think you're foolish enough to refuse. He opened the car door for me. Go to class. Try to maintain your normal routine. My people will make contact by this evening to establish protocols. I stepped out onto the sidewalk, still clutching his card. The Mercedes pulled away, leaving me alone on the street with 1,000 questions and no good answers. I looked around, half expecting to see the men who'd been following me, but the street appeared empty. Yet I felt watched, a sensation I was rapidly getting used to. I went to my torts class, but I couldn't concentrate on Professor Williams's discussion of negligent standards. My mind kept replaying the conversation with Marcus Sterling. He'd been so calm, so matter-of-fact about assassination attempts and rival families, and my impending murder. It was like something from a movie, except this was my actual life now. 4 days ago, my biggest concern had been my contract's midterm. Now I was apparently caught in a war between organized crime families, protected by a man who freely admitted to running illegal operations. After class, I headed to the library to at least attempt studying. That's when I noticed her. A woman in her early 30s, athletic build, dressed in casual clothes that somehow seemed too deliberate. She was reading a magazine near the entrance, but her eyes tracked every person who came and went. When I looked directly at her, she didn't look away. Instead, she gave me a barely perceptible nod. Marcus's people, I realized. This was my new reality. I tried to study, but my mind kept drifting. I thought about the ethical implications of accepting help from someone involved in organized crime. As a law student, I was acutely aware that I was potentially becoming an accessory to various crimes just by accepting his protection. Yet what choice did I have? Report everything to the police and hope they could protect me? The NYPD was notoriously overwhelmed, and witness protection required me to give up everything. My education, my identity, my entire life. Marcus's offer at least let me continue being Emma Parker, law student, even if that Emma now came with a security detail and mob connections. That evening, I returned to my apartment building in Brooklyn. As I approached the entrance, a man I'd never seen before stepped forward. He was in his 40s, solidly built, with the bearing of former military. Ms. Parker, my name is David Chen. I'm the head of your security detail. Mr. Sterling asked me to introduce myself and explain the arrangements. His voice was professional, almost businesslike. You'll have two-person coverage at all times, one close, one at distance. We'll maintain visual contact but won't interfere with your daily activities unless you're threatened. How long does this last? I asked. Until Mr. Sterling determines the threat has been neutralized, or until you request we stop, though I'd strongly advise against the latter until the Delgados have moved on to other concerns. He handed me a phone, a simple smartphone with only a few apps. This is a secure line. Our numbers are programmed in. The device is encrypted and tracked. If you're taken, we'll find you. The casualness with which he said, "If you're taken," made my blood run cold. This wasn't hypothetical danger. These people fully expected kidnapping attempts. What if I just go to the police? I asked, testing him. That's your right, he said evenly. But I'd point out that you've already accepted Mr. Sterling's help by getting in his car this morning. The Delgados know this. They have people watching you, just like we do. Going to the police now won't protect you. It'll just eliminate one of your defense options while confirming to the Delgados that you're not actually Sterling's asset. That makes you a loose end they'll want to tie up. He was right, and I hated that he was right. What if the police come to me? Tell the truth about what you saw at the restaurant. Don't volunteer information about Mr. Sterling or today's conversation. If they press, say you're scared and you don't know anything else. It's not a lie. You are scared, and you genuinely don't know the details of Mr. Sterling's operations. He checked his watch. I'll leave you to your evening. Remember, we're always nearby. Don't let our presence make you careless, but don't let the threat make you paralyzed either. Live your life. He walked away, and I entered my building, climbed the 3 flights to my studio apartment, and locked the door behind me. Only then did I allow myself to fall apart. I sat on my second-hand couch and cried. From fear, from stress, from the surreal impossibility of my situation. A week ago, I was just a law student and waitress. Now I was protected by the mob because I'd saved a crime boss from assassination. How had my life derailed so completely in such a short time? The next morning, I woke to find an email from Columbia's financial aid office. I'd been awarded a full scholarship from the Sterling Foundation, covering tuition, fees, and a generous living stipend. The email praised my academic achievements and potential. I stared at the message, torn between gratitude and guilt. This was money from illegal activities, laundered through a legitimate foundation, buying my silence and cooperation. Yet it also meant I could quit Bellanova, could focus entirely on my studies, could stop worrying about making rent while juggling classes and work. Was I selling my soul, or was I accepting payment for a service rendered? I decided to attend class and think about it later. In criminal law, we were discussing RICO statutes, laws designed to prosecute organized crime. Professor Martinez explained how the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act allowed prosecutors to charge entire criminal enterprises rather than just individual crimes. The irony of studying laws meant to destroy organizations like Marcus Sterling's, while being protected by that very organization, wasn't lost on me. The key to RICO, Professor Martinez said, is proving a pattern of racketeering activity. Prosecutors need to demonstrate that the defendant participated in at least 2 predicate acts as part of an ongoing criminal enterprise. A student raised her hand. But what about people who benefit from the organization without directly participating, like family members or associates who know about the crimes but don't commit them? Good question. The law distinguishes between active participants and innocent beneficiaries. If you knowingly accept benefits derived from racketeering activity and provide something in return, services, information, protection, you can potentially be charged as part of the conspiracy. Professor Martinez looked around the room. This is why witness testimony is so crucial in organized crime cases. Insiders who flip can provide the evidence needed to prove enterprise structure and activity patterns. My stomach dropped. I was exactly the kind of person Professor Martinez was describing. Someone knowingly accepting benefits from a criminal organization. If the FBI ever investigated Marcus Sterling seriously, I could be charged as part of his conspiracy. The scholarship, the protection, even my silence about his identity could all be used against me as evidence of participation in his criminal enterprise. After class, I found a quiet corner of the campus and called the number Marcus had given me. He answered on the second ring. "Emma, is something wrong? I need to understand exactly what I've gotten into. I just learned that accepting help from you could make me part of a criminal conspiracy under federal law. I'm a law student, Mr. Sterling. I can't afford to become a felon before I even take the bar exam." "Call me Marcus." His voice was calm, almost amused. "And you're right to be concerned. But consider this. The Delgados have already identified you as my associate. In the eyes of law enforcement, you were compromised the moment you warned me at Bellanova. Accepting my protection doesn't change your legal exposure. It only changes your survival odds." "That's not exactly reassuring," I said. "Truth rarely is. Meet me for coffee in an hour. There's a place called Artemis near campus on Amsterdam. Come alone. Your security will maintain distance. We need to have a more detailed conversation about your situation." He hung up before I could protest. I stared at the phone, weighing my options. Every instinct said to cut ties now, while I still could. But David Chen's words echoed in my mind. Going to the police would just confirm to the Delgados that I wasn't really Sterling's asset, making me a loose end to eliminate. I was trapped in a situation with no good exits, only choices between bad and worse. An hour later, I walked into Artemis, a small coffee shop frequented by Columbia students. Marcus sat in a back corner booth, positioned to watch both the entrance and the rear exit. He'd dressed down, jeans, a sweater, less conspicuous than his usual tailored suits. If I didn't know better, I'd think he was a professor or grad student. "Thank you for coming," he said, as I slid into the booth across from him. "I understand you're concerned about legal exposure. Let me be frank with you about your situation." Over the next hour, Marcus laid out the reality of my circumstances with brutal honesty. The Delgados, led by Rafael Delgado, a 48-year-old veteran of organized crime, viewed me as Sterling's collaborator. They'd already put a contract on me, not to be executed immediately, but held in reserve for the right moment to maximize impact. His protection wasn't just about keeping me alive. It was about preventing the Delgados from using me as leverage against him. "So I'm bait," I said flatly. "You're a complication they want to resolve, and I want to prevent," he corrected. "The difference matters. If you were just bait, I'd have people watching you but not protecting you, letting them grab you to draw out their operation. Instead, I'm actively preventing them from taking you, which costs me resources and attention. Why? You don't know me. Why invest so much in protecting a random waitress?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, studying me with those penetrating gray eyes. "Because you risked your life to save mine without knowing who I was or what I could offer in return. That kind of instinct, that willingness to do the right thing despite the cost, it's rare, especially in my world." He paused. "Also, I admire intelligence. You saw a threat pattern that professional security teams might have missed. That's valuable." "Valuable enough to protect me indefinitely? That doesn't make sense." "Then let me make it make sense." He leaned forward slightly. "The Delgados and I have been at war for 3 years. It's been expensive, bloody, and ultimately pointless. We're too evenly matched for either side to win decisively. We need an exit ramp, a way to de-escalate without losing face. You could be that exit ramp." "I don't understand." "Rafael Delgado is old school. He values honor, tradition, codes of conduct. The fact that I'm protecting someone who saved my life, especially a civilian not involved in our business, that resonates with his worldview. If I can leverage your situation into a negotiation, I might be able to end this war without more bloodshed. But that only works if you're alive, and clearly under my protection." I absorbed this information, trying to reconcile it with everything I knew about criminal psychology from my classes. You're using me as a peace offering. I'm using you as a symbol of shared values. There's a difference. A peace offering would involve giving you to them, which I won't do. A symbol means demonstrating that even in our world, some lines shouldn't be crossed, like killing innocent civilians who act with honor. He took a sip of his coffee. Of course, this is my best-case scenario. Worst case, the Delgados ignore the symbolism and come after you anyway. That's why you have David and his team. And what happens to me if your plan works? If you negotiate peace with the Delgados using me as your symbol of honor? You continue your life. You finish law school. You become whatever kind of lawyer you want to be. The scholarship remains, consider it payment for services rendered. And maybe, occasionally, I call on you for advice. What kind of advice? I asked suspiciously. Legal advice. You're studying the law. I frequently need to navigate it. Having someone who understands both worlds, someone who's smart enough to spot an assassination plot in real time, that's valuable consulting work. Well paid, ethically ambiguous, occasionally dangerous, but valuable. He met my eyes steadily. I'm not asking you to become my attorney, Emma. I'm suggesting an occasional advisory relationship, compensated appropriately, that helps both of us. It was a seductive offer, made more seductive by how reasonable Marcus made it sound. Occasional legal consulting for a well-paying client who happened to run criminal operations. It was exactly the kind of ethical quagmire that law school warned about. Yet it was also the kind of opportunity that could secure my future, pay off my student loans, establish my career. The devil was offering me everything I needed, and all it would cost was my soul. Or maybe just the illusion of moral purity that law students clung to before the real world complicated everything. I need time to think about this, I said. Of course. But while you think, remember, the Delgados aren't waiting for you to make up your mind. They're planning their move right now. Whatever you decide about our future relationship, you need my protection in the present. Don't confuse those two things. He stood, left money for both our coffees, and walked out. I sat there for another 20 minutes, trying to untangle the moral knots he'd tied around me. By saving his life, I'd crossed a line I didn't know existed. Now I was on the other side, trying to find my way back to normal, while dangerous people made plans that included my death. Marcus Sterling offered survival, education, and opportunity. All it cost was becoming complicit in his world. I left Artemis and walked back toward my apartment, acutely aware of the woman following at a discreet distance. My security, my prison guard, my protector. All of the above, depending on how I chose to frame it. The sun was setting over Brooklyn, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded me of fire. My old life was burning away, whether I wanted it to or not. The only question was what would rise from those ashes. That night, I lay in bed and tried to make a decision. But somewhere between midnight and dawn, I realized the decision had already been made the moment I underlined those words on Marcus Sterling's receipt. I just hadn't understood it yet. The following weeks developed a strange rhythm. I attended my classes at Columbia, studied in the library, lived the life of a typical law student, except for the constant presence of security personnel hovering at the edges of my existence. I learned to recognize them. David Chen, who rotated between shifts, Sarah Martinez, a former police officer who pretended to be a grad student, James Wong, who alternated between being a coffee shop customer and a street vendor depending on the location. They were ghosts, almost invisible, until I learned to look for them. Then I saw them everywhere. The scholarship from the Sterling Foundation had been processed with remarkable efficiency. My financial aid package now covered everything: tuition, books, housing, even a meal plan I rarely used because I was too anxious to eat much. I'd quit Bellanova, citing the need to focus on my studies. My former manager had been understanding, though I caught him exchanging looks with the owner when he thought I wasn't watching. They knew something had happened that night, even if they didn't know exactly what. Marcus and I met periodically, always in different locations, always with his security and mine maintaining perimeters. Our conversations were educational in ways my law professors never intended. He taught me about the real-world application of criminal law, about how organizations structured themselves to avoid RICO prosecution, about the delicate balance between legitimate businesses and illegal operations. I taught him about emerging legal theories, about regulatory vulnerabilities, about how prosecutors built cases. It was a strange exchange program, and I tried not to think too hard about the ethics of it. "You're good at this," Marcus observed during one of our meetings, this time at a small gallery in Chelsea. We were pretending to admire abstract paintings while discussing money laundering statutes. "You think like a prosecutor but understand the defense perspective. That's rare." "I'm still trying to decide what kind of lawyer I want to be," I admitted. "These conversations aren't making that decision easier." "Why not? You're seeing both sides of the system, the theory they teach in classrooms and the reality in the streets. Most lawyers never get that perspective until they've been practicing for years, and by then they're too invested in one side to understand the other." "That's exactly the problem," I said, moving to examine a sculpture that gave us a view of the exits. "I'm not supposed to understand both sides this intimately. Defense attorneys aren't supposed to consult with their clients on how to evade prosecution more effectively. Prosecutors aren't supposed to sympathize with the people they're prosecuting. And yet the best ones do exactly that. The best defense attorneys understand prosecution strategy. The best prosecutors understand why people commit crimes." He paused in front of a canvas that was mostly red slashes against black. "You're not compromising your integrity by understanding complexity, Emma. You're developing judgment." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. It was a text from David Chen. "Possible tail. Don't react. Proceed to exit A3. Transport waiting." My heart rate spiked, but I forced myself to appear calm. Marcus had received a similar message. I could see it in the subtle shift of his posture, the way his eyes scanned the gallery's other visitors. "Time to go," he said quietly. "Stay close to me, but not too close. If something happens, David will get you out." We walked toward the gallery's rear exit, maintaining a casual pace that belied the adrenaline flooding my system. I spotted them then, 2 men who'd been pretending to admire paintings, but whose attention never left us. They were trying to be subtle, but once you knew what to look for, surveillance was hard to hide. We exited into an alley where 2 cars waited. Marcus steered me toward the first one, where David Chen held the door open. "Different routes," Marcus said. "I'll contact you when it's clear." "Wait, what about—" "No time. Go." He pushed me gently but firmly toward the car, then headed to the second vehicle. I slid into the back seat, and David accelerated before I'd even closed the door. Through the rear window, I saw the 2 men from the gallery emerge into the alley, speaking urgently into phones. We turned a corner, and they disappeared from view. "Who were they?" I asked, my voice shaking despite my efforts to stay calm. "Delgado surveillance team," David said, his eyes constantly checking mirrors. "They've been probing the security perimeter for the last week, looking for vulnerabilities. Tonight they got too close. We needed to extract you before they could establish a pattern." "Extract me? Like I'm some kind of intelligence asset?" "You are an asset," David said bluntly. "You're valuable to Mr. Sterling, which makes you valuable to his enemies. That's just the reality, Miss Parker. The sooner you accept it, the better equipped you'll be to stay alive." We drove for 30 minutes, taking a circuitous route through Manhattan and Brooklyn that I couldn't follow. Finally, we pulled into an underground parking garage in a building I didn't recognize. David led me to an elevator that required a key card to operate. We rode up to the 15th floor in silence. The elevator opened directly into a penthouse apartment that was clearly Marcus's. The space was elegant, but not ostentatious. Hardwood floors, minimal furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the East River. David guided me to a living area and gestured to a couch. "Mr. Sterling will join you shortly." He took a different route to ensure he wasn't followed. "Can I get you something to drink? Water? Coffee?" "Water, please," I managed. He brought me a glass and then positioned himself near the windows, watching the street below with professional intensity. I sipped the water and tried to calm my racing thoughts. This was escalating faster than I'd anticipated. The Delgados weren't just watching anymore. They were actively tracking my movements, looking for opportunities. The theoretical danger had become concrete and immediate. 15 minutes later, Marcus arrived through a different entrance, accompanied by 2 of his security personnel. He dismissed them with a gesture and joined me in the living area, pouring himself a whiskey from a cabinet. "I apologize for the drama," he said, settling into a chair across from me. "But we needed to break their surveillance pattern before they mapped your entire routine." "They were that close?" "Close enough. Rafael Delgado has a tactical team that specializes in abduction operations. If they'd established your full pattern, where you live, where you study, your daily routes, they could have planned a grab within 48 hours. He took a sip of his drink. "Fortunately, David's team spotted them early enough to disrupt their reconnaissance." "How long can this go on?" I asked, hearing the exhaustion in my own voice. "Living like this, always looking over my shoulder, never knowing if today's the day someone decides to kill me to send you a message? Until we negotiate a solution or eliminate the threat." He set down his glass. "I told you before that I hope to use your situation as a basis for negotiation. I've made overtures to Rafael through intermediaries, proposing a meeting to discuss terms for de-escalation. So far, he's refused." "Because he thinks killing me will hurt you more than negotiation?" "Partly. Also because accepting my protection of you would require him to acknowledge that some targets are off limits, which sets a precedent he's reluctant to establish. Once you start making rules about who can and can't be targeted, you create constraints on your operational flexibility." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "But there's another factor. Rafael has a daughter, Isabella, who's 24. She's not involved in his business. She's an artist, lives in Soho, deliberately separated from his world. If Rafael acknowledges that civilians under protection are off limits, he implicitly extends that protection to her, which means I could use her as leverage if our war escalates further. So he'd rather kill me than establish a precedent that might protect his own daughter. That's insane. It's strategy. Cold, ruthless, but rational within the framework of our world." He paused. "However, there might be another approach. What do you know about federal witness protection?" I blinked at the sudden shift in topic. "It's a program run by the U.S. Marshals Service. They relocate witnesses to serious crimes, give them new identities, help them rebuild their lives in exchange for testimony. Would you consider it? If I could arrange for the FBI to approach you with an offer, immunity in exchange for testimony about what you witnessed at Bellanova, you'd be taken out of play. The Delgados couldn't touch you without bringing federal heat they can't afford. But I'd have to testify against you," I said slowly, understanding dawning. "I'd have to tell them everything I know about your operations, which is almost nothing. You know I exist. You know I have security personnel. You know I conduct business, all of which is public record or easily assumed. You don't know the details of my operations, my associates, my financial structures. Your testimony would be dramatic, but ultimately not very damaging to me. Yet it would give the FBI a connection to my organization that satisfies their institutional needs without actually compromising my security." I stared at him, trying to process the implications. "You're suggesting I become a federal witness against you, knowing that my testimony won't actually hurt you, just to get me into protective custody?" "I'm suggesting that witness protection might be your best exit from this situation. You'd have to give up being Emma Parker, new name, new location, new life. But you'd be alive and free from the Delgados. You could finish law school somewhere else, start fresh. Except I'd be living a lie for the rest of my life. I couldn't contact my friends, couldn't use my real name, couldn't build a career under my own identity. I shook my head. That's not freedom, Marcus. That's a different kind of prison. Then we find another solution. He stood and walked to the windows, looking out at the city lights. There's a third option we haven't discussed. We could bring the war to the Delgados, force a confrontation that resolves the situation permanently. You mean, kill Rafael Delgado? I mean, create conditions where he has no choice but to negotiate on my terms. That might involve eliminating his operational capacity, targeting his revenue streams, applying pressure through law enforcement channels I have access to. He turned back to me. But I won't lie to you. It would be violent, expensive, and risky. There would be casualties. Some of them might be innocent people who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. I can't be responsible for that, I said immediately. I won't have other people's blood on my hands just to save myself. Then we're back to option 1, maintaining your security indefinitely while I continue diplomatic overtures to Rafael, hoping he eventually agrees to negotiate. Marcus returned to his chair. That's sustainable for now, but it's not a long-term solution. Eventually, someone will make a mistake, or Rafael will find a vulnerability, or you'll make a decision that exposes you to risk we can't mitigate. We sat in silence for several minutes, each contemplating an impossible situation. Outside, the city continued its endless motion. Millions of people living normal lives, unaware of the shadow world that existed parallel to their own. I'd thought I understood criminal law, had thought I understood the justice system. But the classroom version was so sanitized compared to this reality. Here, in Marcus Sterling's penthouse, discussing my survival options like we were choosing insurance plans, I understood for the first time how inadequate my education had been. There might be a fourth option, I said slowly, an idea forming. What if we make me more valuable alive than dead? What if I become a documented neutral party, someone both sides have an interest in protecting? Marcus raised an eyebrow. Explain. I'm studying mediation and alternative dispute resolution this semester. One of the key principles is establishing neutral arbitrators, people who have no stake in the conflict, but who both parties trust to be fair. What if I position myself as a potential mediator between you and the Delgados? Not now, but in the future. Someone who understands both sides, who's demonstrated good judgment, who has a vested interest in de-escalation because I'm caught in the middle. That's ambitious, Marcus said, though I could see he was considering it seriously. It would require Rafael to acknowledge you as legitimate, which means accepting that you're not simply my asset. It would also require you to genuinely be neutral, which becomes difficult when I'm the one protecting you. But I am neutral, I insisted. I don't want either of you to win. I want both of you to stop fighting. That's genuine neutrality. And if Rafael believes that I could serve as a bridge to negotiation in the future, he has an incentive to keep me alive and functioning in that role. It's an interesting approach, Marcus admitted. It would require careful positioning, probably some public demonstration of your neutrality. And it would only work if Rafael believes you have something valuable to offer as a mediator. I do. I understand law, negotiation, conflict resolution. I'm outside your world, which means I don't have the same biases and assumptions that someone inside would have. And I'm young enough that I could serve in this capacity for years, which means I'm a long-term asset worth preserving. Marcus studied me for a long moment. You're remarkable. You know that? Most people in your situation would be paralyzed with fear or demanding I solve everything for them. Instead, you're strategizing your own survival and proposing creative solutions. I'm a law student, I said with a shaky smile. We're trained to think our way out of problems, even when the problems involve people who kill for a living. All right, Marcus said decisively. We'll explore your mediator approach. But it needs to be done carefully, through proper channels, with documentation that establishes your independent status. That means you'll need an attorney, not one of mine, someone genuinely independent who can represent your interests and establish your bona fides. I know someone, I said, thinking of Professor Hendricks, who taught my criminal procedure class. She'd been a public defender for 20 years before joining Columbia's faculty. She's someone both sides would respect, and she's familiar with alternative dispute resolution in high-stakes cases. Good. Approach her, but be careful about what you disclose. You need to give her enough information to understand the situation without compromising my operational security. He checked his watch. It's late. David will take you back to your apartment. We'll reconvene in a few days after you've had a chance to consult with your professor. As I stood to leave, Marcus touched my arm gently. Emma, I want you to understand something. This plan of yours, positioning yourself as a neutral mediator, it's intelligent, and it might work. But it also makes you even more valuable to both sides, which means both sides will have stronger incentives to control you. You're proposing to make yourself indispensable, which is a double-edged sword. I know, I said quietly. But being disposable hasn't been working out very well for my life expectancy. At least if I'm valuable, people have reasons to keep me alive beyond your sense of honor. Fair point. He walked me to the elevator where David waited. Be safe, Emma. And remember, if anything feels wrong, call immediately. Don't try to handle it yourself. The elevator descended, carrying me back down to street level, back to my protected but precarious existence. David drove me home through the late-night streets of Brooklyn, and I watched the city pass by through bulletproof windows. Somewhere out there, Rafael Delgado and his people were planning their next move. Somewhere out there, federal agents were investigating organized crime networks, probably with files on both Marcus Sterling and Rafael Delgado. And here I was, Emma Parker, law student, caught in the middle and trying to turn my liability into an asset. I fell asleep that night thinking about Professor Hendricks and how I would explain my situation without explaining everything. I needed her help, but I also needed to protect her from knowing too much. It was a delicate balance, and I wasn't sure I could pull it off. But I had to try. Because the alternative, living in hiding, or dying in the crossfire, or disappearing into witness protection, none of those were acceptable. I would find a way to survive this situation on my own terms, using the only weapons I had. My intelligence, my training, and my desperate belief that the law could still offer solutions even in the lawless spaces between right and wrong. The next morning, I waited outside Professor Hendricks's office during her posted office hours, rehearsing my carefully prepared explanation. Suzanne Hendricks was in her 50s, with steel-gray hair cut in a practical bob and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She'd spent 2 decades defending clients no one else would take, navigating the worst parts of the criminal justice system with skill and compassion. If anyone could help me establish legitimacy as a neutral party in a gang war, it was her. But I had to convince her without revealing so much that I put her in danger, or compromised Marcus's security. Ms. Parker, she said, opening her door and gesturing me inside. This is a surprise. You're not scheduled for office hours today, are you? No, Professor. I'm sorry for the intrusion, but I need some legal advice. Personal legal advice, not related to class. Her expression shifted from friendly to professional in an instant. All right, sit down and tell me what's going on. I took a breath and launched into the carefully edited version I'd prepared. A few weeks ago, I witnessed a potential crime while working at a restaurant. I intervened in a way that prevented someone from being harmed. Since then, I've been approached by people connected to both the potential victim and the people who might have been planning the crime. I'm caught between 2 hostile groups, and I need to establish myself as a neutral party with legitimate status. Professor Hendricks leaned back in her chair, studying me. When you say you're caught between hostile groups, are we talking about organized crime? I'd prefer not to specify the nature of the groups, I said carefully. But yes, these are people who operate outside legal channels, and they have the capacity to cause me serious harm. Have you considered going to the police? I've considered it, but the situation is complicated. The person I helped has offered me protection in exchange for my intervention. If I go to the police now, I lose that protection and become a target without any defense. Also, I don't have specific information about criminal activities. I witnessed a potential threat, not an actual crime. And you want to position yourself as a mediator between these groups? She tapped her fingers on her desk, thinking, that's an unusual approach. Most people in your situation would be trying to get as far away as possible. I can't get far enough away fast enough, I said honestly. They know who I am, where I live, where I go to school. Running isn't an option. Witness protection would require giving up my identity and education. So I need to make myself valuable enough that both sides have reasons to keep me alive and independent. Professor Hendricks was quiet for a long moment. Emma, what you're describing is extremely dangerous. Mediators in gang conflicts have to be carefully established with the approval of all parties. You can't just declare yourself neutral and expect people who make their living through violence to respect that status. I know. That's why I need your help. I need someone with credentials and reputation to vouch for me, to help establish my legitimacy as a potential neutral party, someone both sides would respect. You're asking me to involve myself in an active gang conflict? I'm asking you to help me establish a legal framework for mediation in a dispute resolution context. You've done alternative dispute resolution work before. This would be similar, just with higher stakes. I met her eyes steadily. Professor, I'm not asking you to put yourself at risk. I'm asking for advice, and possibly a letter of introduction that establishes my bona fides as someone trained in mediation and conflict resolution. The actual interaction with the parties would be my responsibility. She stood and walked to her window, looking out at the Columbia campus. If I help you with this, I need full honesty from you. I need to know exactly what you witnessed, who you're dealing with, and what the actual risks are. I can't provide ethical representation without complete information. If I give you complete information, I make you a potential target, I said. These people don't hesitate to eliminate threats, and knowledge makes you a threat. I'm trying to protect you by keeping you at arm's length. That's not your decision to make. I'm an attorney with 20 years of experience dealing with dangerous people. I know the risks and I can take appropriate precautions, but I won't help you without understanding the full situation. She turned back to face me. So, you have a choice, Emma. Either you trust me with the complete story, or you find another approach to your problem. I weighed the options quickly. Professor Hendricks was right. I couldn't expect her to help me without full disclosure. And if she was willing to take on the risk, who was I to make that decision for her? All right, I said. The person I helped is Marcus Sterling. I don't know all his operations, but I know he runs significant criminal enterprises in Manhattan. The people who want me dead are the Delgado family, led by Rafael Delgado. They believe I'm Sterling's asset because I warned him about an assassination attempt in the restaurant where I worked. Professor Hendricks' eyebrows rose. Marcus Sterling. The Marcus Sterling. The one the FBI has been investigating for organized crime for the past 5 years? Yes. And you intervened in an assassination attempt against him? I spotted the setup and warned him. I didn't know who he was at the time. I just saw something wrong and acted on instinct. She sat back down, processing this information. Emma, do you understand the level of danger you're in? These aren't street gangs fighting over corners. Sterling and Delgado are sophisticated criminal organizations with resources, political connections, and no qualms about eliminating threats. I understand. That's why I need help establishing neutral status. It's the only path I can see that doesn't end with me dead or in hiding for the rest of my life. Professor Hendricks picked up her phone and made a call. Tom, it's Suzanne Hendricks. I need a consultation on a high-stakes dispute resolution matter. Can you come by my office? Yes, today. It's urgent. She hung up and looked at me. Tom Hayes is a retired FBI agent who now works as a security consultant. He specializes in mediating gang conflicts and establishing neutral parties in criminal disputes. If anyone can help you navigate this situation, it's him. An FBI agent? My stomach dropped. Professor, I can't talk to federal law enforcement. That violates the protection arrangement I have with Sterling. Tom is retired. He doesn't report to the Bureau anymore, and his consulting work is protected by attorney-client privilege through me. He's not going to arrest anyone or initiate an investigation. He's going to help us figure out if your mediation approach is viable, and if so, how to implement it. She leaned forward. Emma, you need professional help with this. I can provide the legal framework, but Tom has the practical experience with the specific players involved. Sterling and Delgado both know him and respect him. He's one of the few people who could actually make your neutral status credible. I didn't like it, but she was right. I'd need more than legal theory to navigate this situation. I'd need someone who understood the practical realities of criminal mediation. All right, but Sterling needs to know I'm consulting with a former FBI agent. I don't want him thinking I've betrayed his trust. Fair enough. Call him now, before Tom arrives. Put it on speaker so I can confirm the conversation happened. I pulled out the secure phone Marcus had given me and called his number. He answered immediately. Emma, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong. I'm in Professor Hendricks' office at Columbia. I've explained my situation to her, and she wants to bring in a consultant, Tom Hayes, a retired FBI agent who now does dispute resolution work. I need your permission before I proceed with this consultation. There was a pause. Tom Hayes, 42 years old, spent 15 years investigating organized crime before retiring last year. Smart, ethical, connected. He's reached out to me before about potential mediation opportunities, but I wasn't interested at the time. Another pause. Tell Suzanne I appreciate her caution in calling first. I'm willing to authorize this consultation, but I want a meeting with Hayes before Emma implements any mediation strategy. I need to assess him directly. I'll convey that, Professor Hendricks said, speaking toward the phone. And Marcus, I'm doing this pro bono as Emma's attorney, which means attorney-client privilege applies to all our communications. Nothing said in this consultation will be shared with active law enforcement without Emma's explicit consent. Understood. Emma, be careful. And Suzanne, thank you for helping her. She deserves better than being caught in our war. He hung up, and I pocketed the phone. He's agreed, but he wants to meet Hayes before anything moves forward. That's reasonable. In fact, I'd insist on it. Any mediation strategy requires buy-in from all parties. She checked her watch. Tom should be here in about 20 minutes. Use that time to write down everything you know about the current situation. When the assassination attempt happened, what contacts you've had with Sterling since then, any encounters with Delgado's people, and what security measures are currently in place. I spent the next 20 minutes documenting my bizarre month, from underlining words on a receipt to sitting in a crime boss's penthouse discussing survival strategies. Writing it out made it seem both more real and more surreal. 4 weeks ago, my biggest concern had been my contract's midterm. Now I was creating briefing materials for a dispute resolution consultant about how to keep me alive in a gang war. Tom Hayes arrived exactly on time. A man in his early 40s, medium build, with the alert but relaxed manner of someone comfortable with danger. He had the kind of face that was easy to forget, which I suspected was an asset in his line of work. Professor Hendricks made introductions, and we all settled around her small conference table. So, Hayes said, looking directly at me, Suzanne tells me you want to establish yourself as a neutral mediator between Sterling and Delgado. That's ambitious for a law student who just happened to witness an assassination attempt. I'm open to other suggestions if you have them, I said. But running, hiding, and hoping Sterling's security keeps me alive indefinitely all seem like strategies with limited lifespans. Fair point. He pulled out a tablet and stylus. Let's start with what you know about the current state of the Sterling-Delgado conflict. How long has it been active? Over the next hour, I shared everything Marcus had told me, everything I'd observed, and everything I'd inferred from my criminal law classes. Hayes asked sharp questions, took detailed notes, and occasionally exchanged looks with Professor Hendricks that suggested they were having a silent conversation I wasn't privy to. "All right," Hayes said finally. "Here's my assessment. Your mediation strategy is viable, but it requires several components to work. First, you need documented training in conflict resolution and mediation, actual coursework and certification, not just theoretical knowledge. Second, you need a public-facing identity as a mediator that's separate from your current student identity. This establishes you as a professional in the field rather than just Sterling's protected asset. Third, you need Rafael Delgado to agree to recognize your neutral status, which is the hardest part." "How do we get Rafael to agree?" I asked. "We don't ask him directly. That makes it look like Sterling's initiative, which Rafael will reject. Instead, we have a neutral third party, me, reach out to Rafael to inform him that a potential mediator has emerged from the Sterling conflict and is interested in establishing credentials for future dispute resolution work. I mention you in passing, not as Sterling's person, but as an independent actor who happened to intervene in their conflict and now sees opportunity in the mediation space." "That's a fine distinction," Professor Hendricks observed. "It's a crucial distinction," Hayes corrected. "Rafael needs to believe Emma is pursuing her own interests, not Sterling's agenda. If she's positioning herself as a professional mediator who wants experience with high-stakes conflicts, that's something Rafael can understand and potentially support. It also gives him a way to de-escalate without appearing weak. He's not backing down from Sterling. He's recognizing the value of having a neutral mediator available for future disputes." "What about the FBI?" I asked. "Won't they investigate me once I start publicly positioning myself as a mediator in criminal disputes?" "They'll definitely take an interest," Hayes admitted. "But here's the thing. The FBI actually supports neutral mediators in gang conflicts. It reduces violence, prevents civilian casualties, and sometimes leads to information sharing that helps with investigations. As long as you're genuinely neutral and not actively participating in criminal activities, the Bureau will likely leave you alone and might even provide informal support." So I'd be walking a line between criminal organizations and federal law enforcement, trying to maintain independence from both? Exactly. It's not a comfortable position, but it's sustainable if you're smart about it. And it's infinitely better than your current situation, where you're just a target waiting for someone to take a shot. We talked for another hour, developing a concrete plan. Professor Hendricks would arrange for me to take an intensive mediation certification course over winter break. Hayes would make initial contact with Rafael Delgado's representatives to float the idea of a neutral mediator emerging from recent events. I would start establishing a public profile as a student interested in alternative dispute resolution in high-stakes conflicts, publishing articles, attending conferences, making myself visible in that professional space. This will take 3 to 6 months to fully establish. Hayes warned, during that time, you'll still need Sterling's protection, because Rafael won't recognize your neutrality until you've proven yourself credible. Can Sterling maintain your security for that long? I think so, I said. He seems committed to keeping me alive, both for honor reasons and because he thinks I'm valuable. Good, because the moment Rafael smells weakness, or perceives that Sterling is withdrawing protection, he'll move against you to test your supposed neutral status. You need to be under credible protection until your mediator identity is fully established and recognized by both sides. As the meeting wrapped up, Hayes gave me his card. I'll set up a meeting with Sterling in the next few days. He'll want to assess me directly, make sure I'm not running some kind of FBI operation against him. Once he's satisfied, we'll begin the outreach to Delgado. Until then, maintain your current security protocols and start working on your public profile as a mediator. I left Professor Hendricks' office with a plan, a timeline, and a fragile sense of hope. It wasn't a perfect solution. It required months of careful positioning, multiple parties cooperating against their instincts, and me developing professional credentials while dodging assassination attempts. But it was something concrete, a path forward that didn't require me to abandon my identity or live in permanent hiding. That evening, I sat in my apartment and started researching mediation certification programs. The Columbia program offered an intensive 3-week course over winter break that would provide basic certification. I could supplement that with online courses in gang mediation, conflict resolution in criminal contexts, and alternative dispute resolution in high-stakes negotiations. By spring semester, I'd have enough credentials to begin establishing my professional identity. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Hayes contacted me. Meeting tomorrow at 2 p.m. Location TBD. Bring Professor Hendricks if she's available. We need to discuss parameters before proceeding. I forwarded the message to Professor Hendricks, who confirmed her availability. Then I returned to my research, losing myself in academic articles about successful mediations in gang conflicts, case studies of neutral parties who'd managed to de-escalate violence, and theoretical frameworks for establishing credibility in criminal contexts. Around midnight, my secure phone rang. It was David Chen. Ms. Parker, we've detected increased surveillance around your building. Delgado's people are probing the perimeter again. I'm sending additional security to your floor. They'll maintain position in the hallway outside your apartment until morning. Don't be alarmed if you hear movement. Understood, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Should I be worried? Just cautious. They're testing our response patterns, seeing how quickly we react and how many personnel we deploy. It's intelligence gathering, not an immediate threat. But stay inside tonight, and tomorrow stick to public spaces with high foot traffic. After he hung up, I lay in bed listening to the sounds of the city. Sirens in the distance, traffic on the street below, the occasional footstep in the hallway that might be my security or might be Delgado's surveillance team. I thought about the conversation in Professor Hendricks' office, about the plan to transform myself from victim to professional mediator, from target to neutral party. It was audacious, possibly naive, and definitely dangerous. But it was mine. I wasn't waiting for Marcus Sterling to save me, or for Rafael Delgado to lose interest. I was creating my own path to survival using the only tools I had. My intelligence, my legal training, and my desperate belief that even in the darkest corners of the criminal underworld, there was still room for negotiation and compromise. I just had to survive long enough to prove it. The meeting with Marcus Sterling and Tom Hayes took place in a private room at an exclusive club in Midtown, the kind of place where discretion was valued above everything and security cameras mysteriously malfunctioned when certain members requested privacy. Professor Hendricks and I arrived first, escorted by David Chen, who positioned himself outside the door. The room was elegantly appointed with leather chairs, dark wood paneling, and abstract art that probably cost more than my entire undergraduate education. Marcus arrived 10 minutes later, accompanied by 2 security personnel who took up positions flanking the entrance. He dressed formally for the meeting, a navy suit that emphasized his commanding presence. Tom Hayes arrived last, carrying only a leather portfolio and the calm confidence of someone who'd negotiated with dangerous people for years. Tom, Marcus said, shaking his hand. It's been a while. I heard you retired from the bureau. 18 months ago. I found I was more effective outside the institutional constraints. Hayes took a seat, and we all settled around the conference table. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. Emma's situation is delicate, and I wanted to ensure we're all working from the same understanding before proceeding. Let's start with your assessment, Marcus said. Is her mediation strategy viable? Yes, with caveats. She needs proper training, established credentials, and most importantly, Rafael Delgado needs to perceive her as genuinely independent. That last part is the challenge. Raphael knows you're protecting her, which creates an assumption of loyalty. That assumption exists whether I protect her or not, Marcus observed. The moment she warned me at Bellanova, Raphael concluded she was mine. Withdrawing protection won't change his perception. It'll just make her easier to kill. Agreed. So we need to reframe the narrative. Instead of Emma being your protected asset, she becomes an emerging professional mediator who gained expertise through involuntary exposure to your conflict. She's not working for you. She's building a career in high-stakes dispute resolution, and your conflict happens to be her case study. Professor Hendricks leaned forward. That reframing requires Emma to establish independent credibility quickly. I can provide formal legal representation to document her independence. Tom can provide introductions to the conflict resolution community. But Emma needs to do the actual work. Get certified, publish papers, attend conferences. She needs to become a real mediator, not just play one. I can do that, I said. I'm already planning to take the intensive certification course over winter break. I can write papers about neutral party establishment in criminal contexts. There's very little academic literature on it, so I'd be contributing to the field while building my credentials. Marcus studied me for a long moment. You understand that this path makes you more visible, not less? Right now you're a protected secret. Once you start publishing papers and attending conferences as a gang mediator, you become a public figure. That creates different kinds of risks. I understand. But being a protected secret hasn't been working out very well for my peace of mind. At least if I'm a known mediator, I have a professional identity that's separate from being your liability. She's right, Hayes interjected. The paradox of witness protection is that hiding makes you vulnerable. You're dependent on secrecy and security that can fail. Visibility, when properly managed, creates its own protection. Once Emma is known as a mediator, killing her becomes counterproductive. It eliminates a potential resource that multiple parties might want to use in the future. Raphael still might kill her just to spite me, Marcus said. He might. But that's where my outreach becomes important. I need to approach Raphael not as your representative, but as a neutral party informing him that a mediator with potential value has emerged from your conflict. I mention Emma factually. She's a Columbia law student who intervened to prevent an assassination. She's now pursuing mediation as a career focus, and she's seeking to establish credentials in high-stakes criminal conflicts. No suggestion that you're behind this. No indication she's trying to mediate your specific dispute unless Raphael brings it up. And if he tries to kill her during this delicate positioning phase? Professor Hendricks asked. That's why Sterling's protection continues until Emma's professional identity is established and recognized, Hayes said. We're looking at 3 to 6 months of vulnerability while she builds credibility. During that time, she needs robust security and careful management of her public profile. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed us a photograph. This is Isabella Delgado, Raphael's daughter. 24 years old, artist, lives in Soho, deliberately separated from her father's business. Raphael's whole motivation for refusing my negotiation overtures is his unwillingness to establish precedents that might protect her by limiting targets. But here's the interesting thing. Isabella recently gave an interview to an art magazine, where she mentioned wanting to build bridges between communities divided by violence. She didn't mention her father specifically, but the subtext was clear. You think she might be an ally in establishing Emma's neutral status? I asked. I think she might be sympathetic to the concept of mediation in her father's world. She's experienced the cost of violence. She lost a brother in a gang shooting 5 years ago. If we could convince Isabella that mediators serve a valuable function in preventing that kind of loss, she might influence Raphael's perception. That's manipulative, Professor Hendricks said carefully, using his daughter to pressure him. It's strategic, Marcus corrected, and it's better than the alternative, which is continued violence until one side wins decisively, or we both bleed ourselves into irrelevance. Isabella wants peace in her father's world. We're offering a mechanism that might provide it. That's alignment of interests, not manipulation. We spent the next hour working through details. Hayes would make initial contact with Raphael's representatives within a week, floating the mediator concept, without specifically proposing Emma. Professor Hendricks would file documentation establishing herself as Emma's attorney, creating a paper trail of independent representation. I would enroll in the winter break certification course and begin researching papers on neutral party establishment in criminal conflicts. Marcus would maintain my security, while gradually making our arrangement more public, letting it be known in the right circles that he was protecting a potential mediator, not a personal asset. One more thing, Hayes said, as the meeting was winding down. Emma, you need to prepare for FBI contact. Once you start positioning yourself as a mediator in gang conflicts, the Bureau will want to talk to you. They'll be polite, professional, and they'll try to recruit you as an informant. You need to decide now how you'll handle that approach. What do you recommend? I asked. Be cooperative, but useless. Confirm factual information they already know. Yes, you witnessed something at Bellanova. Yes, Sterling is providing security. Yes, you're pursuing mediation as a career. Don't speculate about criminal activities. Don't offer theories about organizational structures. Don't volunteer information. If they push, refer them to Professor Hendricks as your attorney. They'll categorize you as a neutral party who's not useful for prosecution, and they'll mostly leave you alone. Mostly? I caught the qualifier. There's always a chance they'll try to pressure you into informing, especially if they think you have access to Sterling through your protection arrangement. That's when having Suzanne as your attorney becomes crucial. She can shut down improper approaches and document any harassment. As we prepared to leave, Marcus pulled me aside. Emma, I want you to understand the commitment you're making. This path requires you to maintain genuine neutrality, which means you can't favor me just because I'm protecting you. If you become a real mediator, there will be times when you have to criticize my actions or support proposals I don't like. Can you do that? I think so, I said. I'm more afraid of disappointing you than of Rafael Delgado, which is probably backwards. It's human, he said with a slight smile, but you need to overcome it. The only way this works is if everyone believes you're genuinely independent. That means sometimes working against my interests in service of larger de-escalation goals. I understand. Good. David will take you back to campus. Stay visible, stay in public spaces, and start working on your credentials. We're committed to this strategy now. Let's execute it properly. Over the next 3 weeks, I threw myself into establishing my mediator identity. I enrolled in Columbia's Intensive Mediation Certification Program, a 3-week course that met 6 hours a day and covered everything from basic negotiation theory to complex multi-party disputes. The other students were a mix of lawyers, therapists, and business professionals, looking to add mediation skills to their practices. None of them had any idea I was learning these techniques to survive a gang war. I also began researching and writing my first academic paper, Neutral Party Establishment in High-Stakes Criminal Conflicts, a Framework for Mediator Credibility. It was part legal analysis, part case study, part memoir, though I carefully anonymized the specific details of my situation. Professor Hendricks reviewed drafts and provided feedback, helping me strike the right balance between academic rigor and practical applicability. Tom Hayes made his initial approach to Rafael Delgado's representatives 2 weeks into this process. He called me afterward with an update. I met with Rafael's lawyer, Maria Santos, very sharp, very careful. I mentioned that a potential mediator had emerged from recent events between Sterling and Delgado. She was interested but skeptical. Asked a lot of questions about credentials, independence, and motivations. I gave her your background. Law student at Columbia. Witnessed an incident, now pursuing mediation certification, didn't mention Sterling's protection arrangement. How did she react? I asked. She said Rafael doesn't believe in neutral parties in their world. Everyone serves someone's interests. But she also said he's tired of the conflict with Sterling, and might be open to exploring de-escalation options if credible mechanisms existed. That's not an endorsement, but it's not a rejection either. She's going to report back to Raphael, and we'll see if he wants a follow-up conversation. Should I be doing anything to support this outreach? Keep building your credentials. The stronger your professional identity, the more credible you become as a genuinely independent mediator. Also, I'm going to arrange for you to attend a conflict resolution conference in January. It's specifically focused on gang mediation and criminal violence reduction. Several prominent mediators will be there, and it'll give you visibility in the field. The FBI made contact 3 weeks after our meeting with Marcus and Hayes. I was in the library studying for my criminal procedure exam when 2 agents approached. A man and woman in professional attire, badges discreetly displayed. Emma Parker? I'm Special Agent Lisa Torres. This is Special Agent James Mitchell. We're with the FBI's Organized Crime Task Force. Do you have a few minutes to talk? My heart rate spiked, but I kept my expression neutral. I'd prefer to have my attorney present for any conversation with federal agents. This isn't an interrogation, Agent Torres said smoothly. We just want to ask some general questions about an incident at Bellanova restaurant last month. You're not in any trouble. That's good to hear, but I still want my attorney present. It's nothing personal, just a policy I've adopted given some unusual circumstances in my life lately. I pulled out my phone. I can call her now if you'd like to schedule a formal meeting. Agent Mitchell exchanged a glance with his partner. That's certainly your right. Here's my card. Have your attorney contact us to arrange a meeting. But Ms. Parker, I want you to know that we're aware of your situation with Marcus Sterling and Rafael Delgado. We're concerned for your safety. I appreciate that concern. My attorney will be in touch. I stood, gathered my books, and walked away with as much composure as I could manage. Once I was out of sight, I called Professor Hendricks. The FBI just approached me in the library. I referred them to you, like we discussed. Good. Don't talk to them without me present. I'll contact them tomorrow and arrange a formal meeting. This is expected, Emma. They're just doing their job. As long as we're careful about what information you provide, this shouldn't become a problem. That night, I received a text from Marcus. Heard FBI made contact. Good job handling it. They'll try again, probably with more pressure. Stay consistent with the strategy. Cooperative, but minimally informative. The formal FBI meeting happened a week later in Professor Hendricks's office. Agents Torres and Mitchell asked about the night at Bellanova, what I'd observed, why I'd warned Marcus, what contact I'd had with him since. I answered truthfully but minimally, confirming only facts they already knew. Are you aware that Marcus Sterling is under investigation for racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy? Agent Torres asked. I'm aware that he's a prominent businessman in Manhattan, I said carefully. I don't know the specifics of any investigations. He's providing you with security and financial support. Doesn't that concern you? He's providing protection because the Delgado organization believes I'm his associate, which makes me a target. I'd be more concerned about being unprotected. You could enter witness protection, Agent Mitchell suggested. We could arrange full security and a new identity in exchange for your testimony about what you witnessed. What I witnessed was a potential threat that I reported to someone who might have been in danger. I didn't witness any actual crimes, and I don't have information about Mr. Sterling's business operations that would be useful for prosecution. I looked at Professor Hendricks, who nodded slightly. I appreciate the offer of protection, but I prefer to handle my situation through other channels. Such as becoming a mediator in gang conflicts? Agent Torres asked. We're aware you've enrolled in mediation certification, and you're writing papers about neutral parties in criminal contexts. That's an unusual career path for a law student. It's an underserved field with significant social impact, I said. Violence reduction in high-stakes conflicts requires neutral parties who can establish credibility with multiple sides. I'm interested in developing that expertise. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, with the agents probing for information I didn't have and offering deals I wasn't interested in. Finally, Professor Hendricks intervened. "Agents, my client has been cooperative and answered your questions honestly. She doesn't have information relevant to your investigation, and she's not interested in witness protection, unless you have specific evidence that she's committed a crime. I think we're done here." Agent Torres handed me her card. "Ms. Parker, if you change your mind, if you decide you want protection from the FBI rather than from Marcus Sterling, call me. The offer remains open." After they left, Professor Hendricks and I debriefed. "You did well," she said. "You were truthful without being helpful, which is exactly the right approach. They'll probably monitor you periodically, but they're not going to pressure you further unless your situation changes significantly." "Do you think they'll interfere with my mediator positioning?" I asked. "Unlikely. The FBI actually wants credible mediators in gang conflicts. It serves their violence reduction goals. As long as you maintain genuine neutrality and don't actively obstruct their investigations, they'll probably leave you alone." That night, I sat in my apartment reviewing my progress. In less than 2 months, I'd gone from terrified victim to proactive strategist. I was enrolled in professional mediation training, writing academic papers, managing FBI inquiries, and navigating relationships with both Marcus Sterling and Tom Hayes, while maintaining at least theoretical independence. It was exhausting, often terrifying, and completely surreal. But it was also the most intellectually challenging and personally meaningful work I'd ever done. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Emma Parker, we should talk. Isabella Delgado." I stared at the message, my mind racing. Rafael Delgado's daughter wanted to make contact. This could be an opportunity or a trap, a path to negotiation or an ambush. I forwarded the message to Marcus and Professor Hendricks, then sat back to wait for their advice. One thing I'd learned over the past months: in this world, every contact carried risk, and every opportunity came with strings attached. The key was understanding the strings before they tightened around your throat. I waited 2 hours before responding to Isabella Delgado's text, using that time to consult with Marcus and Professor Hendricks. Marcus was cautious but intrigued. Isabella represented a potential bridge to Rafael, but she also could be a trap. Professor Hendricks advised treating it as a professional contact, not a personal one, and meeting only in public spaces with security nearby. Finally, I texted back. "I'm willing to talk. Coffee tomorrow at Cafe Reggio in Greenwich Village, 2 p.m. Public place, daytime." Her response came immediately. "Agreed. Come alone. I'll do the same." The next afternoon, I walked into Cafe Reggio with David Chen trailing 30 feet behind, disguised as a random customer. The coffee shop was crowded with NYU students and village locals, providing both cover and witnesses. Isabella Delgado sat at a corner table, and I recognized her from the photograph Marcus had shown me. Dark, curly hair, artistic clothing, and intelligent eyes that tracked my approach. "Emma Parker," she said as I sat down. "Thank you for meeting me. Isabella Delgado, I'm curious why you wanted this meeting. Because I heard through certain channels that you're positioning yourself as a mediator in conflicts like the one between Marcus Sterling and my father. I wanted to understand if that's true and, if so, whether you're serious about it or just trying to survive a situation you stumbled into." Her directness was refreshing. Both, honestly. I'm trying to survive, but I'm also serious about developing mediation expertise. The two goals aren't mutually exclusive. "No, they're not." She signaled the waiter and ordered espresso for both of us. "I'm going to be frank with you, Emma. I hate my father's business. I've spent my entire adult life trying to separate myself from it, building a career in art, establishing an identity that has nothing to do with organized crime. But I also understand his world better than most people, because I grew up in it." "Why are you telling me this?" because I think you might actually be genuine about wanting to mediate, and if that's true, I might be able to help. My father respects very few things, but he does respect strength, intelligence, and what he calls honor, acting according to your stated principles even when it's difficult. If you can demonstrate those qualities, he might consider you a legitimate neutral party. And if I can't? Then you're just another person caught in his war with Sterling, and he'll eliminate you when it becomes convenient. She took a sip of her espresso. I'm not saying that to scare you. I'm saying it because you need to understand what you're dealing with. My father doesn't believe in neutral parties. He thinks everyone ultimately serves someone's interests. To change his mind, you'll have to prove you're genuinely independent, even when that independence costs you. How do I prove that? By being willing to criticize both sides publicly, by taking positions that harm Sterling's interests despite his protection, by demonstrating that your principles matter more than your survival instincts. She leaned forward. Emma, here's what most people don't understand about my father. He's not irrational or mindlessly violent. He operates according to a very specific code that prioritizes loyalty, strength, and consistency. If you can demonstrate that you operate according to a code too, even if it's different from his, he'll respect that. Over the next hour, Isabella gave me an education in Rafael Delgado's psychology that no amount of research could have provided. She explained his history, growing up in poverty in the Bronx, building his organization through strategic violence and careful alliances, losing his son to a gang shooting that could have been prevented with better communication between rival groups. That loss had hardened him, but also made him quietly supportive of violence reduction efforts, even as he publicly maintained his tough stance. My brother's death was stupid, Isabella said quietly. Two groups who'd been allies had a miscommunication about territory. Instead of talking, they shot first. My brother wasn't even involved in the dispute. He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. After that, my father became more careful about communication and de-escalation, but he won't show weakness by admitting it publicly. So he might actually welcome mediation if it's framed correctly? He might, but you'd have to approach it carefully. You can't position yourself as Sterling's representative, or as someone trying to help Sterling. You have to be genuinely neutral, interested in violence reduction for its own sake. And you have to be willing to call out both sides when they act in ways that escalate conflict. That's a narrow path to walk. It is. But I think you might be able to do it. You intervened at Bellanova not because you knew who Sterling was, but because you saw a threat and reacted. That's principle-driven action. Exactly the kind of thing my father understands and respects. As our meeting wrapped up, Isabella gave me her personal number. Call me if you need insight into how my father thinks. I can't guarantee he'll accept you as a mediator, but I can help you avoid mistakes that would definitely disqualify you. And Emma, be careful. My father's people are watching you, just like Sterling's are. Everything you do is being evaluated. I walked out of Cafe Reggio and immediately called Professor Hendricks to debrief. Isabella was helpful, almost too helpful. I can't figure out if she's genuinely trying to support my mediator positioning, or if she's gathering intelligence for her father. Probably both, Professor Hendricks said. In that world, people rarely have single motivations. She might genuinely want peace in her father's world, while also serving his interests by assessing whether you're legitimate. The key is staying consistent with your positioning regardless of who's evaluating you. Over the next month, several things happened that tested my ability to maintain neutral positioning. First, the winter break mediation certification program concluded with a complex simulation, a multi-party dispute involving gang territories, legitimate business interests, and community concerns. I took the role of mediator and successfully navigated the simulation to a consensus agreement. The instructor, a veteran mediator named Dr. Patricia Reynolds, pulled me aside afterward. Emma, that was exceptional work. You have natural instincts for this field. Reading people, identifying underlying interests, reframing positions as mutual concerns. Have you considered making mediation your primary career focus after law school? I'm definitely considering it, I said carefully. I'm particularly interested in high-stakes criminal conflicts where violence reduction is a primary goal. That's a challenging specialty. Most mediators avoid criminal contexts because the risks are so high. But there's significant need. Gang violence costs communities enormously in lives, economic development, and social cohesion. If you're serious about pursuing it, I'd be happy to provide mentorship and introductions to the field. I'd appreciate that very much. Second, my academic paper on neutral party establishment was accepted for publication in the Columbia Journal of Conflict Resolution. Professor Hendricks had helped me revise it to be sufficiently academic, while still being practically applicable. The published version included case studies from other cities, Chicago, Los Angeles, Baltimore, where mediators had successfully established neutral status in gang conflicts. It carefully avoided specific details about my own situation, but made clear that the framework had been tested in real-world conditions. Third, Tom Hayes reported progress with Rafael Delgado's representatives. Maria Santos reached out again. Rafael is interested in learning more about your credentials and positioning. He's not committing to anything, but he's willing to have a preliminary conversation about the theoretical value of mediators in conflicts like his. That's more than I expected at this stage. What happens next? I asked. We arrange a meeting. You, me, Rafael, and probably Maria. It'll be formal, carefully scripted, and extremely high stakes. Rafael will test you, ask difficult questions, probe your motivations, look for signs you're Sterling's asset rather than genuinely independent. You'll need to be absolutely consistent with your positioning. When? A few weeks, maybe a month. He's taking his time, which is good. It means he's seriously considering this rather than just humoring us. In the meantime, keep building your credentials and public profile. Fourth, and most challenging, I had to publicly critique Marcus Sterling's organization. A news article appeared about a violent incident in Midtown, a shooting outside a restaurant that Sterling's organization allegedly controlled. 2 people were injured, including a bystander. The article speculated about gang war escalation and community impact. I wrote a response piece for Columbia's Law Review blog, carefully arguing that both Sterling and Delgado organizations bore responsibility for the violence, and that their ongoing conflict was causing unacceptable civilian harm. I didn't reveal my personal connection to Sterling, but wrote as an informed observer concerned about violence reduction. Professor Hendricks reviewed the piece before I published it. This will anger Marcus, she warned. You're publicly criticizing his organization and implicitly calling for him to de-escalate. I know, but Isabella said I need to demonstrate genuine neutrality even when it costs me. If I only criticize Delgado and never Sterling, I'm not actually neutral. I'm just Sterling's defender with better marketing. You're right, but be prepared for consequences. I published the piece, and within hours my phone rang. It was Marcus. Emma, I just read your blog post. We need to talk. We met that evening at his penthouse, and I could sense his displeasure the moment I walked in. He dismissed his security and poured himself a drink before speaking. You publicly criticized my organization and suggested I'm responsible for civilian casualties. You understand this damages my reputation and potentially strengthens Rafael's position in any negotiation? I understand, I said, keeping my voice steady despite my racing heart. But if I'm going to be a credible mediator, I can't protect your interests at the expense of my principles. That shooting did injure a bystander, and your conflict with Delgado is causing community harm. Those are facts, and acknowledging them doesn't make me disloyal. It makes me honest. Honest, he repeated, with an edge to his voice. You're protecting yourself by sacrificing my interests. That's strategic, not honest. It's both. Marcus, you told me yourself that this only works if I'm genuinely neutral. That means sometimes criticizing you when your actions escalate violence. If I can't do that, I'm not a mediator. I'm just your employee with a fancy title." We stared at each other for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, Marcus smiled slightly. "Isabella contacted you, didn't she? This has her fingerprints all over it, pushing you to demonstrate independence by publicly criticizing me. She gave me advice about how your conflict looks to neutral observers. What I did with that advice was my decision." "Fair enough." He took a sip of his drink. "For what it's worth, you're right about the shooting. My people got sloppy, and a civilian got hurt. That's unacceptable, and I've made that clear to my organization. But Emma, you need to understand, in my world, public criticism is seen as disloyalty. I'm protecting you because you saved my life, and because I think you're valuable. Don't make me regret that decision by becoming a liability." "I'm trying to become valuable in a different way," I said. "Not as your protected asset, but as a genuinely neutral mediator who both you and Raphael can trust. That requires me to maintain independence, even when you don't like what I say." "I know. It doesn't mean I have to like it." He refilled his glass. "Your meeting with Raphael is scheduled for 3 weeks from now. Tom Hayes will accompany you. Raphael will test you extensively about your motivations, your relationship with me, your understanding of his world. If you pass those tests, he'll consider recognizing your neutral status. If you fail, you'll be back to being a target." "I understand." "Do you? Because this is your last chance to back out. Once you meet with Raphael, you're committed to this path. You can't retreat to being just a law student under my protection. You'll be a known quantity to both sides, and your survival will depend on maintaining that neutral position regardless of the pressure." "I'm committed," I said. "I've been committed since I decided not to run or hide or pretend this wasn't happening. This is my path forward, and I'm going to see it through." The 3 weeks before my meeting with Rafael Delgado were intense. I prepared extensively with Tom Hayes and Professor Hendricks, rehearsing responses to difficult questions, clarifying my positioning, and studying everything I could find about Raphael's history and psychology. Isabella provided additional insights, teaching me the subtle protocols and expectations of her father's world. "He'll test your courage," she warned, "not by threatening you directly, but by creating situations where most people would back down or defer. You need to be respectful but firm. Acknowledge his authority in his world, while asserting your independence in yours." I also continued building my public profile as a mediator. I attended a conflict resolution conference in Boston, presented a paper on neutral party establishment, and made connections with veteran mediators who worked in high-stakes contexts. Dr. Patricia Reynolds introduced me to several colleagues who'd successfully mediated gang conflicts, and I absorbed everything they could teach me about navigating that dangerous specialty. Finally, the day of the meeting arrived. Tom Hayes picked me up at 1 p.m. in an unmarked car. We drove to a restaurant in Little Italy that Rafael Delgado owned, neutral territory where both sides could meet safely. My security detail remained outside, as did Rafael's people. This meeting would be just 4 people: Rafael, Maria Santos, Tom Hayes, and me. Rafael Delgado was 48, but looked older, lines etched deep around his eyes from years of stress and violence. He wore an expensive suit and carried himself with the authority of someone accustomed to complete control. Maria Santos, his lawyer, was in her 30s, sharply dressed, with the watchful eyes of someone who missed nothing. "Ms. Parker," Rafael said, gesturing to a seat, "Tom has told me interesting things about you. I wanted to assess you personally before deciding whether mediators have any place in my world." "I appreciate the opportunity," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I know my positioning is unconventional, a law student claiming to offer mediation services in conflicts between established organizations. But I believe neutral parties can serve a valuable function in reducing violence and finding alternatives to perpetual conflict." "Tell me about the night at Bellanova," Raphael said abruptly. "Why did you warn Marcus Sterling?" I observed behavior patterns that suggested a planned assassination. The temporary bartender, the positioned gunman, the coordinated glances. It was obvious something was wrong. I warned Mr. Sterling because I saw a threat, not because I knew who he was or what he represented. But you knew what you were disrupting. You knew that warning him would make you a target. I suspected it, yes. But I acted on instinct, seeing danger and responding. I didn't fully understand the implications until afterward. And now? Now that you understand you're caught between Sterling and me, how do you justify taking his protection while claiming to be neutral? This was the crucial test. I accept Mr. Sterling's protection because refusing it would mean dying, and I have no intention of dying to prove a philosophical point about neutrality. But accepting protection doesn't mean accepting his agenda. I've publicly criticized his organization when warranted. I maintain independent legal representation, and I'm pursuing mediation as a professional specialty, not as his employee or agent. Raphael studied me for a long moment. Isabella speaks well of you. She thinks you're genuine, not just another person playing angles in a game you don't understand. But Isabella is idealistic. She sees possibility where I see risk. Your daughter understands that violence reduction serves everyone's interests, even if it requires acknowledging some shared values with opponents. That's not idealism. That's practical recognition that perpetual conflict costs everyone. It costs my enemies more than it costs me, Raphael said flatly. Does it? Your son died in a conflict that could have been resolved through better communication. How do you calculate that cost? The room went silent. Maria Santos's eyes widened slightly, and I saw Tom Hayes tense. I'd taken an enormous risk bringing up Raphael's dead son, but Isabella had told me that he respected directness more than deference. Raphael's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. You're either very brave or very stupid to mention my son. I'm neither. I'm someone trying to understand whether violence reduction genuinely matters to you, or if you're just managing a business where casualties are acceptable overhead. If it's the latter, then mediation has no value to you, and we're wasting each other's time. And if it's the former, then we might find common ground. Not because you like Marcus Sterling, or because he likes you, but because both of you are smart enough to recognize when ongoing conflict costs more than resolution. Raphael leaned back in his chair, still studying me. Tell me what you know about mediation in criminal conflicts. Give me examples of where it's worked and where it's failed. For the next hour, I discussed case studies from Chicago, Baltimore, and Los Angeles, gang conflicts where mediators had successfully established neutral status and facilitated de-escalation. I explained the principles of interest-based negotiation, the importance of face-saving mechanisms, and the need for enforcement structures that didn't depend on trust. Raphael asked sharp questions, testing my knowledge and looking for inconsistencies or naivete. Finally, he stood. Ms. Parker, I'm not convinced that mediators have value in my world. But I'm willing to observe your work and reassess that conclusion. You may continue positioning yourself as a neutral party. If you maintain genuine independence, if you criticize Sterling when warranted, and me when warranted, if you prioritize violence reduction over anyone's particular interests, then I'll recognize your neutral status. But if you reveal yourself as Sterling's asset, I'll eliminate you without hesitation. Are we clear? Crystal clear, I said. Good. Maria will be your contact with my organization. If you have information or proposals relevant to de-escalation, communicate through her. And Ms. Parker, don't waste my time with naive idealism. I'm a businessman in a violent industry. I'll engage with mediation if it serves my interests, not because it's morally virtuous. I understand. Violence reduction isn't about virtue. It's about rational choice theory. Reducing conflict costs while maintaining necessary operations serves everyone's bottom line. Something like approval flickered across Raphael's face. You're smarter than you look. We'll see if you're smart enough to survive what you've started. He left with Maria Santos, and I found myself alone with Tom Hayes in the empty restaurant. I realized I was shaking, adrenaline and relief flooding my system simultaneously. "You did well," Tom said quietly. Bringing up his son was risky, but it worked. You demonstrated that you're willing to engage honestly even about painful subjects. That's exactly the kind of courage Raphael respects. I thought he was going to kill me right there. He considered it. But you didn't back down, and you made a logical argument for why mediation serves his interests. That's about the best outcome we could have hoped for. He stood. "Let's get you back to campus. You have a lot of work ahead of you now that both sides have recognized your positioning." As we drove back through Manhattan, I thought about what I'd accomplished. In less than 3 months, I'd transformed from terrified victim to recognized mediator. I had protection from Marcus Sterling, qualified acceptance from Rafael Delgado, credentials from Columbia's mediation program, and a published paper establishing my expertise. I'd navigated FBI inquiries, built relationships with veteran mediators, and successfully positioned myself as genuinely neutral despite being caught in a violent gang conflict. But I'd also crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I was now a known quantity in the criminal underworld, someone both sides would watch, test, and potentially use. My survival depended on maintaining perfect balance between opposing forces, never favoring one side over the other, always prioritizing violence reduction, even when it conflicted with my personal interests. That night I sat in my apartment and called my mother for the first time in weeks. We talked about ordinary things, her job, my classes, upcoming holidays. I didn't mention gang wars or mediation, or the fact that my life had become something from a crime novel. For 30 minutes, I was just Emma Parker, law student and daughter, living a normal life. After we hung up, I looked at the secure phone Marcus had given me, at Isabella's number saved in my contacts, at the business cards from FBI agents and veteran mediators and Maria Santos. These were the pieces of my new life, the networks and relationships that would determine whether I survived the situation I'd created for myself. I'd underlined 6 words on a restaurant receipt: gunman, bar, setup, failed, exit, now, and changed everything. I'd saved Marcus Sterling's life and lost my own innocence about how the world really worked. But I'd also found a purpose, a specialty, a way to contribute to violence reduction in communities that desperately needed it. The path ahead was uncertain and dangerous. There would be more tests, more conflicts, more moments where I'd have to choose between safety and principles. But for the first time since that night at Bellanova, I felt like I had agency, not just reacting to threats, but actively shaping my own survival through intelligence, training, and courage. I was Emma Parker, mediator in training, caught between criminal organizations and federal law enforcement, trying to reduce violence while staying alive. It wasn't the career path I'd imagined when I started law school, but it was mine, and I was determined to succeed at it, one impossible negotiation at a time.